Hi, 8th graders. This is the math video for lesson 2-4, which is on page 78. 2-4, page 78. It's also a reminder to you, don't forget, according to the assignment sheet, you're doing the bottom of page 74, the practice quiz, where you've got 10 problems there. So practice quiz 1 on the bottom of 74, then you got page 78, where you're doing a bunch of problems dealing with multiplication of integers. Now, the first thing to remember about multiplying integers is the fact that the rules are different than adding or subtracting. Remember that? When multiplying two positive integers, you get a positive answer. When multiplying two negative integers, you also get a positive answer. Remember, if the signs are the same and you're multiplying, the answer is always positive. But if the signs are different, like you're multiplying a positive by a negative, the answer is always a negative answer. So make sure you understand those rules. Okay? Study them a little bit. Now, let me show you some examples of that on the board here. Remember, we're only multiplying right now. 6 times 3 is obviously 18. But so too is negative 3 times negative 6. That's also 18. If the signs are the same, positive and positive, the answer is a positive. If the signs are the same, negative and negative, the answer is a positive. But what if the signs are different? If the signs are different, then the answer is always a negative answer. A negative times a positive is a negative. A positive times a negative is a negative. If the signs are different, the answers are negative. If the signs are the same, the answers are positive. Okay, so that's the simple part. You learned that in 6th grade. You knew that in 8th grade. Now, what do you do with problems like this, where they start throwing variables in there? That's a big part of this lesson today, and we got to make sure you understand how to do this. This right here is negative 5 times 7 times x. It really could be written like this. It really could be written like this. Take the whole numbers first. That's negative 35 times x. So the answer is negative 35 times x. Bingo, there it is. Let's try this one. Again, it could be written like this. 6 times negative 8 times an a value. This times this is negative 48. Negative 48 times the remaining a. Done. Okay, this one looks trickier, but it's not really that big of a deal. Just think of it like this. Negative 7 times s times negative 8 times t. Just do the whole numbers first. What's negative 7 times negative 8? 56. What's s times e? T. S times t. So it's 56 times s times t. Done. Notice I'm doing the whole numbers first, and then I'm doing the variables. I'm doing the integers first, then the variables. Let's look at this one right here. If it were me, I'd think of this as 2 times a times b times 3 times negative 7. And I would go so far as grouping together the integers first and putting the variables near the end. No big deal. No reason why we can't. And what do we get? This is 6 times negative 7. 6 times negative 7 is negative 42 times a times b. Done. Negative 42 times a times b. Done. How about this one right here? Looks tricky, but it's not. What's a negative times a negative? A positive, right? So this is positive 4p. We could write it like that. Positive times a negative. What's a positive times a negative? A negative. A negative what? A negative 4pq. And the negative goes out in front, and it encompasses the whole number. Right? Negative 4pq. Look at this one. Let's group the numbers or the integers first. 9 times negative 2 times 3. And then let's stick the variables at the end, c and d. And notice we're putting the variables in order always. Alphabetically in order, s then t, c then d, p then q, a then b. Don't put b then a. Just don't do that. What's 9 times a negative 2? Negative 18. What's negative 18 times 3? A negative 54. Times c times d. Done. Okay. Let's come over here and do a bunch more of these to make sure we're on the right track. How about this one? Negative 2 times negative 15 times negative 6. What would that equal? Well, just two numbers at a time. This times this is positive 30, right? And now we're going to take that positive 30, because it's a negative times a negative is a positive, times this negative 6, negative 180. Done. How about something like this? Negative 6 times r times 12 times s. No big deal. Just kind of realize this is all multiplication here, and we can rearrange this any way we want. So I'm going to rearrange it like this. Negative 6 times 12 times r times s, just to get things in order. This is negative 72. And what do we got left? Times r times s. Done. That's the final answer. What about something like this? Negative 60 times m times a negative 2 times a negative 3 times n. Remember, everything's multiplication, so we can rearrange things. We know about the associative property. We know about the commutative property. We can use that to our advantage, and we can write the problem like this. Negative 60 times negative 2 times negative 3 times m times n. So the first two end up being 120, right? Whoops. Then these two end up being negative 360. Guess what? We're done. We're done. Negative 360 times m times n. How about the next one? How about 19h times negative 1 times negative 2s? Again, let's just rearrange things to make it easier to deal with. We'll put all the integers here, and then the h, and then the s at the end. 19 times negative 1 is negative 19, times negative 2 is positive 38. So we get a positive 38 times h times s. Positive 38 times h times s. What about something like this? Negative 1 times negative a times a negative b times c. Well, let's take these two first. A negative times a negative is a positive, so I get 1a times a negative b times c. Well, couldn't we rewrite this like this? Bump, bump, bump. Yeah, we could. What do we got here? These two together make a positive, right? And 1 times a is just simply a. What's a times a negative b? Isn't it negative ab? And then what's negative a times b times c? Isn't that negative a times b times c? And we're done. Negative a times b times c. What about something like this? Negative b times negative 12 times 11. No big deal. Let's just rearrange it and put the whole numbers out in front, the integers out in the front, and then the negative b at the end. This times this is negative 132 times a negative b squared, or negative b rather. A negative times a negative is a positive, right? Done. Just got to follow the rules. Just got to follow the rules. How about something like this? Negative 27 times y times a negative z. This times this would be a negative 27y times a negative z, right? A negative times a negative is a positive, so it'd be 27yz when we're done. 27, whoops, did that go off the screen? Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Sorry about that. So a negative times a negative is a positive, right? Negative times a negative is a positive. We get 27 times y times z. Hopefully, this makes sense to you. But don't forget, you can check your work as you go along. Got any questions, talk to me.